Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Hey there, listener name. Ever get the feeling we're kind of speaking in code these days? All these acronyms.
It's like alphabet soup sometimes, right?
Right. Well, today we're tackling a big one, at least for North America.
Oh, yeah.
T-MEC, or USMCA, if you
Right,
prefer.
right.
We're going deep on its impact on Mexico, especially during the AMLO years. What kind of picture is emerging from your research?
Well, I mean, trade agreements, they always sound good on paper, right?
Sure.
More trade, more investment, more jobs.
Yeah, sounds like a win.
Right, and in this case, it's not like those things didn't happen at all. Like, we did see a surge in cross-border trade and foreign investment. It definitely got a boost.
Okay.
But like with anything, I guess, any relationship, it's complicated.
All right, so let's talk about the complications then. One term that pops up in the source material is monoculture. What's that all about?
Yeah, so it basically means like putting all your eggs in one basket, you know?
Oh,
And the source uses it to describe Mexico's reliance on the US as its main trading partner. So like imagine you're a business owner in Mexico, right? And most of your customers, they're up in the US. If something happens to the US economy, you're in a pretty vulnerable spot.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So if most of what Mexico produces is going north, any hiccups in the U.S. economy would hit Mexico pretty hard.
Oh, absolutely. And we're not just talking about like a few products here. This dependence on the US, it affects the whole bunch of industries in Mexico. Manufacturing, agriculture, you name it.
So we've got this potential vulnerability. But what's the alternative, right? It's not like Mexico can just suddenly find new trading partners overnight.
No, absolutely not. You're talking about decades of, economic policies, business practices. They're all kind of intertwined with this north-south trade flow. I mean, there are established supply chains, industries are built around what the U.S. wants, and then there are cultural connections too, right? It all plays a role.
Yeah, it's like trying to turn a supertanker. Takes time, a lot of effort.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting, right? Because AMLO, he isn't just accepting things as they are. He's actively trying to figure out how to navigate this whole thing.
Okay, so he sees the dependency issue. But what's the plan? What's he actually doing about it?
Well, a big part of it is this idea of economic sovereignty, basically giving Mexico more control over, its own destiny, economically speaking.
Okay.
And to get there, he's really focusing on making Mexico's internal markets stronger.
So less reliance on external factors and more on building up their own internal strength.
Exactly, precisely. We'll get into the specifics of his approach a bit later. But first, I think it's worth looking at which industries are most affected by this whole U.S. dependency thing and how they're dealing with these challenges.
So we're talking about Mexico relying less on exporting to the U.S. and focusing more on its own backyard, right? But how does that actually work? Like,
Yeah.
You can't just snap your fingers and suddenly have a thriving internal market.
Oh, absolutely not. It's definitely more than just willpower. It takes a really targeted approach, and AMLO seems to be focusing on a few key areas. One that really jumps out from your research is his focus on supporting those PM.
KMEs.
Yeah, the small and medium-sized businesses.
Right. I mean, they're the backbone of any economy, aren't they?
They really are, but they often have a tougher time, especially competing with those bigger players.
Yeah, for sure. So how's AMLO helping them out?
Well, he's tackling it from a few different angles. One is access to financing, right? Starting or expanding a business, it takes money.
It does, yeah.
So his administration has been working on making it easier for these PYMs to get loans. And not just loans with decent interest rates, something they really struggled with before.
Okay, so giving them the means to actually, grow and compete.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just money, too. The source material also talks about how AMLO is focusing on infrastructure development.
Okay, so like roads and bridges, all that.
Well, that's definitely part of it, especially in areas that haven't really seen their fair share of investment.
Right.
But it goes beyond that, too. Think like expanding internet access. I mean, that's crucial for businesses these days, right?
Totally, yeah.
And then investing in renewable energy sources, which can help these PYMEs save money in the long run, lower their costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's about making it easier for them to do business, period.
Absolutely. It's about creating an environment where these smaller businesses can actually thrive, not just survive. But, and this is important, this internal strengthening is really only one part of the picture, right? Emil also knows that Mexico needs to diversify its trading partners globally.
Okay, so less reliance on that one big customer.
Yeah.
More about, building relationships with a bunch of different partners all over the world.
Right. And it's about figuring out what Mexico's good at, where it has an advantage, and then finding new markets for those products and services. Like, for example, Mexico has a huge agricultural industry.
Yeah, they do.
Could they be the ones supplying certain crops to other regions that are struggling with food security? That's one thing they're looking into.
Interesting. Okay. But getting onto that global stage, it comes with its own challenges, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest hurdles AMLO has to clear to make this whole diversification thing work?
Well, one big one is competitiveness. Mexico has to make sure its industries are, up to snuff, meeting global standards when it comes to quality, efficiency, all that. That means serious investment in education and job training.
Right. So it's not just about what they're producing. It's about having a workforce that can actually compete on that level. Anything else stand out in the source material as a potential roadblock?
One thing they mentioned was bureaucracy. I mean, anyone who's ever dealt with red tape, it can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's a sense that to really get things moving, Mexico might need to streamline its regulations, make it easier to do business there. That'll be crucial for attracting foreign investment and making trade smoother.
It's about showing those foreign businesses that, hey, Mexico's open for business. Come on in. But beyond all the practical stuff, I imagine there's a psychological hurdle here, too. After decades of being so closely tied to the U.S. economy, it must be hard to shift those mindsets, those expectations.
Oh, without a doubt. And the source touches on this as well. There's this kind of ingrained hesitation to change, a fear of moving away from what's familiar, even if what's familiar isn't
It's
perfect.
that whole better the devil you know kind of
Yeah.
thing. So how does AMLO get people on board with this new vision, this idea of a more independent, more diversified Mexican economy?
Well, it seems like a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, he's tapping into a sense of national pride, emphasizing the potential for Mexico to forge its own path,
Right.
to be more in control of its own economic destiny. But, and this is key, it's not just talk. He's also putting his money where his mouth is, with those investments we talked about earlier, infrastructure, supporting those small businesses, things like that.
So it's about showing that this isn't just some far-off dream. It's actually possible.
Exactly. It's about building confidence. And, speaking of different approaches, we haven't even touched on this whole fair trade thing that comes up in the source material.
Oh, right. And that's a whole other can of worms.
It is. It is.
It is, yeah. It's one thing to toss around phrases like fair trade, but isn't that one of those things that people say without really, defining what it actually means? What's AMLO's take on all this?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, right? But it seems like in this case, AMLO is actually trying to put some action behind those words, make it more than just like a nice idea. And from what I'm seeing in the source material, there are a few key things that define his vision for fair trade.
So break it down. What are the pillars of AMLO's fair trade vision?
Well, labor standards are huge for him. He's been really clear about making sure Mexican workers aren't getting exploited.
Right.
Just because someone's looking for cheap labor, that doesn't mean anything goes right. So that means pushing for better wages, safer working conditions, and just generally stronger protections for workers' rights in any new trade deals.
So making sure these agreements aren't just benefiting, like, the people at the top, but also the people who are actually doing the work.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just workers' rights, too. There's this whole environmental aspect as well. AMLO sees these new trade deals as a chance to promote sustainability. So think maybe stricter environmental regulations for companies in Mexico, even if those regulations are tougher than what they're used to back home.
So holding those trading partners to a higher standard, making sure everyone's doing their part for the planet.
Right. And then on top of all that, there's technology transfer. Remember we were talking about Mexico needing to be more competitive globally?
Yeah.
Well, AMLO thinks that trade deals should also include, like, ways to share technology and know-how.
Interesting. So it's not just about the stuff that's being bought and sold, but also sharing knowledge and skills so Mexico's industries can keep growing.
Exactly. Now, whether all of this actually happens, whether he can actually pull this off, that's another story. There are going to be people who push back, powerful interests both inside and outside of Mexico. But the fact that he's even bringing these issues up, challenging the way things have always been done, that's a big deal in itself.
It really is. Makes you wonder if other countries might follow suit. If Mexico actually manages to make these fair trade practices a reality, could that inspire others to rethink how they approach these deals?
That's the big question, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
It will. Well, listener name, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From T-MEC to AMLO's plans for Mexico's economic future, it's a pretty complex issue. But you've got the information now, the context. So keep thinking about it, keep learning, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.